anybody knows what this is. I don't think so. Yeah. So when I grew up Jewish, and when you become bar mitzvahed, you get one of these. And every high holidays, which is Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, you in Reform Judaism, you only pull this out twice a year for those two holidays. And so, and it's only men for the most part. So me and my dad would have our little bags. This is called a talis bag or a talit bag. And inside is the prayer shawl that you get when you turn 13 and become bar mitzvahed. And there's a little, there's a prayer on there. You say the prayer and you put it around your shoulders. And on mine are all the 12 tribes of Israel. There's little pictures on there that has like a symbol for each of the tribes. And so twice a year, me and my dad, and then when my mom became bat mitzvahed, she had one too. And we would put them on, and it was like the one time of a year my dad would wear a suit and I would wear a suit, and we'd sit in temple for a long time, which seemed like a long time for me. And we would thumb wrestle and we would do the thing. And when you have a bar mitzvah, a couple things happen. One of the ceremonies is you have the big scrolls of the Torah. It's the first 5 books of Moses. You actually learn enough Hebrew in Reform Judaism. You learn enough Hebrew to be able to read your Torah portion, because the year is split into a portion for every single week. And so I read from the scroll, and then you pass. Whoever your oldest relative is passes the scroll to the next, to you. And so my grandpa passed it to my dad passed it to me, and it symbolizes being handed the covenant, and being handed a relationship with God, this ancient relationship. So that's really cool. And then you also you get when you become bar mitzvahed, this is called a yod, or yod, and it's basically a stick with a little hand with a little finger at the end of it, and this is what you use to read to keep your place in the Hebrew. So, and that'll figure in here in a minute. So yeah, I grew up. I learned all about the way God created the universe and started to form a people. And I think one of the things that happens almost right away is we did the wrong thing, and we started trusting ourselves to define good and evil by eating of the tree that we weren't supposed to, and that's kind of like our thing. And so we had the fall, and we were exiled into the wilderness. And I started to realize after being here and becoming a bit of like an aspiring Bible nerd here with some of my friends and talking all about this stuff, and I realized that it says right there that if we would have began to define what was good or bad for ourselves and then eat of the tree of life and live forever, we would just remain in that place of suffering forever. So God, in a loving act, removed us from that, and we still had to learn the same lesson, whether it was in the garden or in the wilderness, that we need to trust God. And so throughout growing up, I didn't always trust God, and usually tried to define what I thought was right. And actually, I have one of my childhood friends here, George, is Sammy's brother, and he was there for all that, and so he knows all that story. You can ask him later. But but basically, what I realized eventually is that it's a calamity when we decide what's right and wrong, or that if there is no right and wrong, that's a really, really bad thing, and it's the same thing as suffering, right? Not being able to trust your Father. And so I wasn't too smart a guy, so the good Lord decided to send me somebody much smarter than me, my wife Heather, and she set to work civilizing me. And we fell in love, and I managed to convince her to marry me, and here we are. And then God gave us Haley, and that just completed me. So who I am now is the three of us all together as one thing, and that's how we're created to actually be, I believe. And so that right when she was born, I remember somebody telling me, like, you can't be actually truly happy until you're not the most important person in your life, which that makes a ton of sense. And as soon as I realized that, it just switches everything. And now you have a mission, and now you have a reason to not worry about how you feel, and then you just feel great, because everything's easy. Now you get to live for somebody else. And then we started watching Duck Dynasty, because we were really tired, and it was the only thing on, and it was a silly show, it was funny, but we see the family at the end of the shows saying grace and praying together, and that was something you just don't really see if you're not in a religious community, and so that really sunk in as seeing what it looks like for a family to pray together. So we started saying grace, and it was a thing. We didn't. At this point, I wasn't even really doing anything Jewish or having a direct relationship with God. It was really, what I thought of God, it was just sort of off in the ether and, very non-specific. And so time goes on, and Haley gets accepted to go to a Christian school. And so I just thought to myself, I better go to church just to see what she's going to learn about, so I want to support her on, on her journey. And so I go, and that morning, I think they were sick, so I went by myself, and I came to faith, and I was just moved into a totally different person, and just filled up with the Holy Spirit, and it's hard to even describe, but after that, I became really confused, because that was something that almost happened to me rather than something I went there to choose to do that morning, and it started changing the way I thought about everything. And so, I told Heather, like, let's start going to church, and she was all about it. So we started going, and we started checking out a couple of different churches, and our friends from Girl Scouts, the Bots, they said, oh, you guys should come with us, And so we came over, we sat right over there, and as soon as I walked in here, I was like delivered into our family. And I don't even know what about it was. It's just, it felt just like about the same size congregation as I had growing up, just good people, and just everything was just really great. And it was instantly just a no-brainer. So I called Pastor Garrett, and I just had all sorts of questions, because I'm like, okay, I don't really know anything about any of this, so I start grilling him on this and this and that, and making sure this was a good place for my family, and he's just like, he had just answered all my questions, whatever I wanted. He let me call him after, anyway, so he oriented me to the whole thing. And at this point, none of this made any sense. This whole Jesus thing and all this stuff, I grew up without any of this, but that morning, it was just true. And so then I had to figure out. So my heart believed, but my mind didn't. And so at some point, I just decided, well, then that's what it's going to be. And that was a big shift for me, because I realized sometimes you just don't understand things. And then I started reading the Bible, and that was really something, because this is a strange book sometimes, if you've ever sat down to try to read it. And that's why people are still reading it, thousands of years later. And it just became really awesome, where I started to realize, like, certain passages will just become transparent, and they just speak right to you. And that was really something. And then sometimes it's just totally opaque, and you can't even make any sense of it. And then I realized that it doesn't have to make sense to me at all. Like, it's the Word of God, so let it come to you as it comes to you. So I started doing that, and we started going to the Wednesday night groups where we would do, book clubs and studies, and I just started learning everything I could, and it was as if every time Garrett got up here, or Pastor Matt got up here to preach, they got on the phone with God and said, okay, what does David need to hear today? And then delivered the sermon. And it's literally felt like that for 2 years now, And I just got introduced to a whole family. And that's it's just, this church and everything that I've learned is just a huge treasure to me. And there was a few things that, so growing up, there's different kinds of Judaism. There's Orthodox, Conservative, and Reform, and there's different kinds in all of those. We were Reform, which is the most loosey-goosey of the whole thing. We didn't keep kosher. We didn't, grow the hair on the sides of our beards or anything like that. But most of what we would do is we would have a lot of holidays. There was always a holiday happening. And you would hear the stories from the Torah of what was happening in that holiday, and even from some other writings too. For instance, during Passover, you would read the story of Passover, and you would learn the whole story. During Purim, you would read the story from the book of Esther. All these different holidays, Hanukkah, all these different things. And so I learned a lot of these stories, and they're deep within me from when I was a kid. But growing up, I felt like Christians were different from Jews, and so I had this strange thing that happened, where before I didn't really do a lot of Jewish things or think about my Judaism a lot right before I came to faith, but right after I did, immediately, I felt like my heritage just sort of woke up and was like, hey, what's going on here, And there was some sort of strange thing in opposition to this new understanding that I was having about everything, And I was being totally transformed. And it was rising with a certain kind of power that was just, I didn't really know what to do. And so, and I talked to a few people, and I even heard a few people from the people who are Jewish who, who believe in Jesus, and kind of heard their stories and different things. But it kind of just didn't really make sense. And I didn't quite know what to do with that. And so why all of a sudden this was becoming hugely important, and I'm thinking about my parents and being connected to this long line of people. So, I mean, my dad, when he did the genetic testing, is 100%, well, his sister is 100% Ashkenazi Jewish. So our ancestors followed the cloud and the fire through the desert thousands of years ago, and I felt like you had to stop that. So it was really weird. Then I started watching The Chosen, and it hit me like a ton of bricks. I saw Jesus taking an apple, dipping it in honey, and eating it while they're celebrating Rosh Hashanah. And I did that every year of my entire life. And then I saw him when he was preaching in the temple, wrapping this exact thing around him, holding up the yod and reading from the Torah. God wrapping this around him and grabbing this and reading from his book. And it was like, oh, this is the most Jewish thing you can do, And so, yeah. And then I remember I was coming each week, and I didn't want to take the communion until I knew inside what was actually happening, because I wanted to treat this new path, if it was going to be my path, as something really important and really special. And I remember every week coming up and getting the blessing, and just hearing the song that we were singing at the time about sitting around the table of the King, and just that being one day this is going to be for me too. And so I told Pastor Garrett and Pastor Matt, hey, I want to be baptized. And so he was set to work in the gym so he could pick me up and dip me in the thing, which is a joke we always like to throw out there. So we did, and I was baptized, and I want to read something that I read much later that just blew me away. Another thing. This is from the book of Ezekiel, hundreds of years before the time of Jesus, and what all my family and ancestors would have been super familiar with, which I found out later from one of the John Mark Comer classes, that they would just commit this to memory. So it was just so part of what they did. And it said, "I will take you from the nations and gather you from all the countries and bring you into your own land. I will sprinkle clean water on you, and you shall be clean from all your uncleanliness. And from all your idols I will cleanse you, and I will give you a new heart, and a new spirit I put within you. And I will remove the heart of stone from your flesh and give you a heart of flesh." And it's like, wow, I start talking about baptizing, and it's just amazing. And so, that's the story basically. I remember realizing that there was so much that I didn't know that still filtered down through society, and I realized that a lot of people that don't grow up Christian don't know a lot of things. And I think one of the biggest things that shocked me, because I always heard Jesus walked on water. So I'm like, okay, that sounds great. I don't really know much about that, and that's cool. And then I was listening to the song Oceans, and she's talking about stepping out onto the water, and I'm like, I don't even really know the story about Jesus walking on water. So I look it up, and the story isn't that Jesus walked on water, it's that Peter walked on water. That's the story, right? And that never made it to me, that if we trust God, He'll have us walk out onto something we don't know anything about. And that's the story, that He just remakes us, and it doesn't make any sense. And, you start to learn that this isn't something you deserve or something that you can earn. It's just, we're His kids, and He loves us, and He just makes us into new creations. And we don't have to know how any of this works. It's like if your kid doesn't know how to do calculus, and they just, "Here, Dad," just hand it to him, So that's basically it. You are all a complete treasure to me and to our family, and it feels like something really important to belong to all of you and to this place and to my family. And so I think I'll end with my friend Joe Kurtz. I was talking to him as I was leaving service one time, and we hadn't been here for a while because I think we were sick, and then we had to be somewhere. It was maybe 3 or 4 weeks, but I remember being somewhere else and thinking like, oh man, I miss my church family. This is the first time that had really happened, because we've been coming pretty consistently since we started coming here. And I started thinking of all of your faces and just being here, and just this joy that sits at the base of everything we do here that you kind of don't really realize until you're not here, And I remember telling him, like, man, it's just like, I just like think of all of you and just this like love and this family. And he said to me, "That's how heaven is, man." And it just hit me like a ton of bricks. Like, that's what heaven is with everybody. Everybody is there. So that's it. Thank you for everything.